All right, welcome back. I would now like to introduce Larry Gritz from Sony Pictures Imageworks. If you don't know Larry, he is a very integral part of our open source community, as well as the creator of Open Shading Language, Open Image IO. Anything else I should add in there?
That's good for me.
Okay.
Right, and I'm also the vice chair of the ASWF TAC. So in that capacity, David asked me to look into the problem of how we're going to understand the situation about engineering contributions, how to measure it, and what to do about anything we find. So not here, but on the original schedule, I was co-billed with John Mertic. So he has done some interesting measurements that I want to quickly brief you on first. So he did a bunch of analysis with the LFX Insights platform to look at the project histories and gather some statistics. So one thing that he looked at is across all the projects and across time. Yeah. Okay. Like what's been happening with the PRs? You know, things. You know, additions, deletions, changes, issues, things like that. So I think you don't have to see all the details, but I think the one big delta in this is after about 2019, things really shot up on a lot of these projects, and that's when the foundation was founded. So it has it's definitely spurred some activity here. And issues also have been steadily growing on all the projects, which is a good sign of life and use. Projects that don't get issues are probably not getting used by anybody. And also, we can see some good spikes in the right parts of the timeline for just this sort of line of code additions to these projects. Now, that said, there are more questions to be asked that I think are really hard to tease out of those graphs. And in particular, so I want to think about the, you know, what do we do here, right? So there's three big aspects, I think, to the way the foundation works. One is we have the member companies. They and the rest of the community, the non-members too, depend on these projects vitally, right? Like all our businesses are dependent on these. They form the basis for companies' products, how we get the films made, all of this. But what we don't know exactly is like which of the projects are widely used, how important are they to the members, and so on. The second leg of the stool is the projects, the way they serve their constituencies is to keep themselves running. They have to maintain themselves, they have to add features, they have to, you know, basically perform the functions that everybody depends them on, and where they need to go in the future. But an unanswered question here was, okay, like, do they have what they need to accomplish those goals, right? Or are they having problems? And the third leg of the stool is that we know that at least for Premier members, there is on paper a requirement to be putting at least one full-time equivalent of engineering contributions into the project. It doesn't have to be one human, it doesn't have to be all in one project, but that's just sort of a, like, we want people to not just, as we said this morning, not just write the check, but you gotta get some skin in the game. But we hadn't really done a lot of accounting about where those resources are going, and are they going to the right places? So I set out to try to get to the bottom of some of these and see where the issues lay. So I think everyone's got a kind of a zoomed in view of the picture, maybe their project or their company, but we didn't have a good global view of it all to actually understand the overall dynamics of what resources are being put where. So to collect this information, I made what we called the ASWF project engineering contribution matrix. So there's basically two sheets, one shown here, you don't have to read this, just to give the flavor. But on one, we asked the companies to self-report a bunch of information, and on the other, we asked the project leads to self-report a bunch of information. So briefly, for the companies, what we wanted to know is which of the projects do they consider critical to their business? And since they're supposed to be putting engineering resources into them also, like, where do they think they're going? What projects are you actually participating in? And we actually broke it down into two things. Of course, there's and I don't mean this in a bad way, like there's the drive-by contributions that you make. Like, there's a bug, you send the patch to fix it. Or you need a feature for your studio, you add that. But then, like, maybe you're not really in the project until the next time you need a thing, right? And so those are the sort of ad hoc contributions. But we also wanted to know, so we asked separately from that, like, the sort of continuing dedicated resources that we hope people are putting in. And we set the bar kind of low. We just said, like, which projects do you know that you have a person assigned to spend 20% or more of their time actually improving, like, over the long term, not like 20% of every day or 20% of every week, but like viewed in the grand scheme of things. And we also wanted to know, like, is there an issue with how difficult it is for the companies to make contributions? And so the two things that we asked are, like, when you have you have an improvement to make, you know that you have the code ready, how many days does it take you before you can send that PR, tell the engineer to send that PR out? And two subcases of that, one is if it's a project you've contributed to before, that's a different beast than a project that you've never done anything for. Like, maybe you need to sign CLAs, you need legal clearances, you gotta, whatever, right? We've all been through that. And then on the project side, we wanted to know for each project, which companies do you think have dedicated resources going into your project? So that's the mirror image of the first question we asked the companies, like, are these going to match? Will be interesting to find out. And we also asked the project, I'm skeptical of some of these line of codes, number of PRs and things. Like, they can mean different things to different projects. It's really hard to tease out exactly what that means and how many it takes to be healthy. The projects are different. So instead, what we asked is, what percentage of the resources you need do you think that you have right now? And further broke that down into, like, the tactical, the day-to-day stuff, issues, bug fixes, do releases, keep up with the mail list, that sort of thing, and keep the CI working, versus the strategic, where does the project need to be next year, 3 years from now? Is someone thinking about what APIs are you going to need down the road, like the long-term future, the big thought, kind of stuff, which my personal theory is, if you're not immersed in a project every day, like, you probably don't have enough of a global picture of where it's going to really need to be in 5 years. Okay, so what did we find out? Some very interesting things. So one thing we were concerned all along with, are the projects thinking that they get the resources that the companies claim that they're putting in? Or is there a mismatch? So the short answer is yeah. Like, sort of, there's a little bit of slop to it because people on each side of the issue don't necessarily know how to measure the 20% thing. Like, there's a little bit of noise expected in the system, but by and large, we did not find any cases where companies were claiming they were putting a bunch of resources into things where the projects had no idea. Like, their answers, without consulting each other, matched pretty good. So I consider that a success of the system. In terms of the contribution friction, I think this is mostly another win. I believed that we would find that a few companies kind of had this down pat and most were really struggling, and that's not really the case. Surprisingly and pleasantly, almost every member company reported that once they got started contributing on a project, the threshold for, like, being able to get additional PRs sent as issues came up is they can essentially do it at will. Like, most of them said one day, right? Meaning either the engineer working on it, basically has, can just take the initiative to send it, or that whatever permissions they need are, like, it's just such a short path that they can get an immediate turnaround. So I think that's great news. In terms of first contribution to a project, that had a wide range. So a couple of companies, claim a few days. I won't name names, but there was an outlier that bravely said 200 days. And I would say that the average is like somewhere in the several week range, which I guess is to be expected. But this will be interesting to see, can we tighten this up over time, and what are the hurdles to making that a lower barrier to entry? But one of the I know we talk about dev days a lot, but one of the nice things about dev days is that is an excuse for the companies to get those CLAs signed and get the clearances that you need to do that first commit on a non-threatening little thing, and then often that opens the doors to doing bigger things later. Okay, so you might be wondering, we asked everybody, what are the projects that are critical to your company? So what did we find? But first, I want to emphasize that this isn't a competition, and it's not a measure of like who deserves to be in the foundation, or like how important is the project, or like how you like what a great, no, none of that. Like I personally think, and I think this is widely shared, like it's okay for a project in the foundation to be critical to a couple of members and not others. I also think it's okay for a project to be, maybe a project is ubiquitously used, but the nature of it is such that nobody says that this is an absolutely business critical thing to us. Those are all fine. So like none of what I'm about to show you is judgments about the project's worthiness. It's just about where the resources are going. So here is what people thought were the critical projects. And the numbers are how many of the member companies cited that project as being business critical for them. And having a wide range is fine, but some of them, so there's the ones I call the big six. These are the ones where for each of them, the majority of companies, over 2/3, cited all of them as being important, with a couple of them basically being super important to everybody. And it's probably not a surprise which ones they are, right? It's in rank order: OpenEXR, OpenColor.io, OpenVDB, MaterialX, OpenImage.io, and Open Shading Language. Probably not a surprise, but interesting to see the numbers. So, how are they getting resourced? So maybe your guess looks like that, right? Where you think like, okay, the most important projects, they're getting a lot of resources. There's some sort of tapering down so that roughly things get in proportional to how important everybody thinks it is, how many companies are absolutely relying on these projects. Is it? No, not even close. So here's the real numbers. So the yellow line are like the number of companies that claim that they send these ad hoc things, meaning somebody at some point has sent a patch, right? The red line are the ones where the companies claim that they have somebody who actually dedicates some time to this project on an ongoing basis. And so I find this completely shocking that some of no one's getting a lot. But some of the things that people have cited as like the projects everyone depends on are lucky to have one person, two people, maybe consistently putting time and effort into it over long periods. And in terms of what the project said, also, I guess the semi-good news is most people reported that they're sort of, at least in the upper half, of getting their needs met for the tactical concerns, but pretty much uniformly, everybody said they're not even close on the strategic initiatives, meaning when we ask people what percentage of the resources that you would need to hit your roadmaps that you have are you getting, I think only one project answered above 50%. Many of them were more in the 25% region. So I think we can say safely these are under-resourced projects for the big picture items. Okay, so to summarize the crisis here, so although many of probably most of the projects are getting fine with the day-to-day maintenance, they are pretty much uniformly were reporting, that they're severely under-resourced for the longer-term issues that they hope to hit, which means executing on the roadmaps. And those mean delivering the things that the members themselves expect out of those projects and are, basing their work on. And like I said before, like the real shocking thing is how many of these projects that everyone thinks is getting everything they need, like maybe they got 1 or 2 people. So I have a theory about what's going on. I don't have data to back this up. First of all, I don't think any of the member companies are trying to shirk their responsibilities here. Like, I totally don't buy that for a minute. But what I do think might be happening is, I think it's when you don't know what everybody else is doing. I think it's very easy to look at the projects that they look really solid and they're widely used and jump to the conclusion that they must be getting all the love they need, and they haven't fallen apart yet, but that's not actually what's going on. So I think it's just that people don't know where the resources are going and where they need to go. I think there's some matchmaking to be made to connect the resources from the companies to the projects that those very companies are relying on and need to keep moving forward. Another thing that was my theory from the beginning that I still hold to, which is when you ask the leaders to say which projects they're doing and which people are doing it, I think if you, as the leader of your company, don't know who is working on which project, it's probably nobody. Okay, so where do we want to get? Ideally, I think that we don't expect every member to be putting in a bunch of work on every project. In fact, that sort of defeats the purpose of this, community resource. Like, each company's got a certain area of expertise. They've got a certain amount of resources they could put places. You want to choose strategically. Where can you make a difference, and what's important to you? And ideally, everybody's putting effort into the projects that they are getting the most out of also. We know which ones those are, right? And overall, when you sort of look at the whole organization and the array of projects, you want to imagine that the resources going into that are somehow proportional to the sort of criticality across the board. For those of you at member companies, let's make sure that you're really putting in your FTE pledges. Let's be more conscious about where they're going and that they're directed toward the projects that you are depending on. And we want to make sure that those projects, we don't want any of the projects to be starving, but especially we don't want the ones that the industry writ large is super dependent on and would be in trouble if things went awry. Another bit of reframing that I want to put into people's heads is internally to your companies. If you have an internal piece of software that you made, you wouldn't leave it to chance if it was being well maintained, right? Like, you recognize that as a potential point of failure for your organization if there's only one developer who knows how something really important works, or it's not getting maintained well. That's something that's important to fix. And historically, what we've done is we've gone from a world where at the studios, every important piece of software either used to be something very expensive externally that you paid for, or something you had to completely develop internally and put all the effort into. And we've transitioned to where a lot of the core technologies are these open source projects. But sometimes I think we lose sight of the fact that we're no less dependent on them. And in a very real sense, we need to treat them with just as much care about the risks and the potential failure points as if they were still internal only projects. And so I hope there's time left. But so I want to actually have this be more of a discussion. This isn't about naming and shaming anybody, but it's more about I think we all recognize that there's a risk here to be managed by our companies and our industry and the projects. And we're open to suggestions for how to do it, how to organize this matchmaking. I think the companies want to put resources into it, but I don't think they always know where to go. Maybe some of this data is enough to light the fires under the right people, But yeah, I want to open up to some dialogue here.
Questions, comments?
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you give me an example of what a tactical, microphone, oh, so exciting, start singing. What is a tactical versus strategic?
Yeah, so I would consider strategic like, what is the overall direction of the project? Where does it need to go in the coming years? Major architectural initiatives, things like that. Whereas the tactical is, how do we do a release this month? How do I fix this bug? How do I add this feature? How do we keep the continuous integration system from not breaking when GitHub, changed a thing under the covers over there? Like that day-to-day stuff. But even, and the kind of things that someone can parachute into the project, they make one PR that does a specific thing they need, and then they leave. That's the tactical. The strategic is, how are we going to add, GPU functionality to this thing that everyone's going to need in 3 years? That sort of more long-term thinking.
We had a question.
Oh, hi, Larry. Hang on, we're back here.
You wouldn't believe how bright these lights are. Is that Ronan?
It does make a difference. Hi, it's Ronan Barcel. Just adding my baseless speculation as to what might be going on with the critical ones not getting love. Could be that a company's only going to allow something to be critical if it's perceived as stable and not questionable, in which case it doesn't need love because it works. And so you put your attention into all the new features and things aren't stable. So that could be another explanation.
I think that mostly resonates well with my hypothesis also, but it's not like the ones. I don't want to call anybody unstable. Some of the projects are on the sort of the tail end because they're new and they haven't gotten wide adoption yet. So that's natural. Like that isn't necessarily, again, that's not a reflection on how the project is going, but it's also not like we're seeing tremendous resources going into the shiny new thing at the expense of the old thing. It's kind of not going anywhere, but it seems especially risky to not have them go into those things that everyone's relying on. But I think you're also kind of latching on to probably what the dynamic is.
So I know this is less of a number you can gather, but do you have a sense of if critical projects have a lot more eyes on them, they could changes could require a lot more committee work and less technical work? Does that come into play at all, where it's harder to make changes to something that everybody cares about and is critical to everybody?
I don't think that's what's going on here. Like, we're not seeing that kind of resistance. I almost wish we would have more opinionated, people putting the brakes on things sometimes. I don't really think that's it. And John Mertic, who unfortunately couldn't be here, there's a phrase that he likes to use, that these projects are duocracies. If you want to set the direction of the project, really the ticket to doing that is to participate in them. So like there is a degree to which like the projects are what the people who are willing to do the work make them.
Hey, Larry. It's Kimball. I'm in the back.
Yeah.
Hey, one of the things I realized we didn't quite ask in this was that, do people still have a problem with segmented networks, right? Where it's actually difficult for people to be on their workstation, which is on a production network, and sort of push a PR to GitHub, say, right? Where we, like, for example, we use an internal GitLab server, right? And this is something that I know we hit this last dev days where it was actually kind of a pain in the butt. And I don't know if maybe we could just do a poll. Like, are other people constrained by any of this, or is it just me?
If anyone is, like, just raise your hand. We have a segmented network, but we're not constrained by that in terms of these contributions. I mean, I'm just answering for my company.
It's a pain, but it isn't a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, we didn't answer that? Well, like, you know, we wanted to keep it short because we wanted to have a really high participation rate. But for this whole thing, you know, two things. One is it's a living document. So you may have noticed when I had the spreadsheet flashed up, the column all the way on the right is for the person who filled it out for each company or each project to put their name and the date, so we can sort of keep an eye on how stale those answers are. We want people to update it over time. We want them to use some of these answers as metrics against themselves and against the other companies, like how do you improve over time. But also, like, this is just the first round of our trying to get an understanding of what the issues are, so that doesn't mean there aren't other questions we'll ask in the future or things that are issues for contributions that we never thought to ask or hadn't considered yet. All those are possible.
Hey, Larry. Eric, Autodesk.
Yeah. Hi.
So first I want to thank you for this really thoughtful look into things. Like I really like the way you've kind of broken it out. And for me, at least, there's definitely a realization with this kind of local versus global view. Mm-hmm. For sure, as a company that does have quite a few resources working these things, like we do prioritize what is strategically important for us. So like,
And that's fine. Yeah.
No, I know. But at the same time, you know, like I don't think we have anybody really doing anything on EXR. But we do critically depend on that. So if I knew that that needed help, like I would actually divert resources from some of our critical projects there because I don't have that global view. So I think this is really interesting to look at it that way. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah, no. And I think that's the point of this, is just to get it all visible. I'm hoping a bunch of the company leaders just look at this and just immediately think like, oh, I didn't know that thing needed help. I have help to give. We can do the matchmaking. And by the way, just as an aside, like your company's doing great. Like, I mean, you're key contributors on several of the projects. I think you're a model for kind of how generous you can be about that. And but like on many of these things, aside, like on many of these projects that have, you know, one or two people working part-time on them doing most of the contributions, I mean, honestly, the threshold for how much additional resources need to be added to double or triple that project's development velocity is shockingly small, right? Like we're not talking about we need 5 full-time people. Like, if I think in any of these projects, if 3 companies each put someone on it with 25% of their time, that could easily double like the rate at which they could like hit their roadmap goals. I think that's true for most of them. It's not a large amount.
Okay, so I know there's a lot of questions and people out here. We do have to stick to our schedule, so we have time for one more question, but I would highly encourage, I'm going to ask Larry, after this talk is a break, about a half-hour break. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask if Larry can hang out there and continue the discussion.
I will,
potentially.
and there's beer tonight. And
yes.
Like this is the kickoff for what I hope will be many hallway discussions and ongoing after school.
Okay, so one last question.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's really important is versions and compatibility with different versions. And also looking in the future, things like fluid simulation and muscle simulation will eventually get more open. So is there a way to have everything working? I mean, the latest releases have been really good for USD and Alembic and stuff like that, but is there like a pathway for making sure everything works in newer versions, you know, between packages?
You know, it's interesting that you asked that. Something came up on the Slack. There is a working group for CI. That's where some of these inter-project issues and tooling and stuff comes along. We were actually talking about this on the Slack not long ago, about the idea of the CI group potentially putting a kind of a fake project together that basically pulls in the latest versions of all the other projects individually and kind of has a little wrapper app that just sort of exercises the fact that they can all link against each other and not conflict and stuff. And yeah, so we don't have that kind of system-wide testing, but I think it's a cool idea.
Thank you.
All right.